This is the moment Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murdering George Floyd.
We shook up the world! The world!
This man! God don't lie!
The intersection where George Floyd was killed has been barricaded by activists for almost a year.
This is our street! Whose street? Our street!
It's a site of protest, healing, art, and joy.
How are you? Woo.
All right, now tell them this is how we ride in George Floyd Square.
It's also a site of gun violence. Minneapolis wants to end the peaceful occupation of George Floyd Square, citing an uptick in violent crime that's gone up across the city.
Bullet hole, bullet hole.
And yet, Minneapolis still mostly has the same police department.
George Floyd is not the first black man killed here by the hands of the police on this block.
And the same chronic inequalities that have plagued the lives of Black Americans.
You can't be both the villain and the superhero of the story. You can't go around killing black men and erecting memorials in their honor.
We visited the protest zone in the days leading up to the verdict and found a neighborhood intent on reimagining a new way forward.
This is what community looks like.
Yes, ma'am!
Show them what community looks like.
This is what community looks like!
Show them what community looks like.
This is what community looks like!
All we want everybody to do is respect one another. These are my words. And we let people know that you're walking into the free state of George Floyd. You're free to come in. You're free. And everybody's welcome.
Eliza Wesley has been a near constant presence at the square since Floyd's murder.
Hello, how y'all doing? All right. They call me the gatekeeper because I am here. I help de-escalate situations. I help support the peoples out here.
In the days after Floyd's murder, folks started gathering organically in the square to pay their respects. Eliza helped block off the surrounding streets to preserve the sacred place where he died and give people a place to grieve. The city would later add barricades, but when it was announced last August that it wanted to reopen the streets, protesters refused to leave.
And I always tell people, greet one another with a smile.
The 4-block zone is located south of downtown Minneapolis and stands at a crossroads between 4 different neighborhoods. Inside the barricades, this homegrown activist camp has built a greenhouse, a library, a people's closet for clothing donations, and even made space for medical services.
Hey, Marsha. How you holding up?
I'm good. I'm just hoping that the helicopter doesn't come down.
I
If I can go one weekend without getting buzzed by helicopters, that would make my weekend.
I hear you.
The National Guard was called in for the trial, and this community, still reeling from the events of last summer, felt terrorized.
There's just constant helicopters and then the tanks running by, and anytime there's a tank or a loud noise, people that are in this community are dealing with, post-traumatic stress, dealing with the trauma, reliving that.
Jeanette Rupert, an ICU nurse and reverend, is part of a squad of medics and volunteers who provide support to people in the community. They're called 612 MASH.
I usually walk along every barricade just to make sure, the thing is that people don't understand, a lot of times when people need help, they're not always gonna come to you. You may not even know that they need help. So just being that presence and walking around, it just helps people to see, hey, this is what I need. Hello, hi, good to see you.
Today, Jeanette's checking in on Bob Hull, a military vet who's recovering from surgery. Folks in the neighborhood call him Uncle Bob.
Oh my gosh, they look night and day from the last time I saw them. They look really good.
The city has vowed and then backtracked on its promise to reopen the streets several times in the last year. But as far as Jeanette is concerned, what this occupation has built is something the city can never get rid of.
I honestly don't think that you can dismantle the community because community is the people. It's not a physical thing. And what the community is looking for is they're looking for justice. And they're looking for, hope. They're looking for healing.
The occupation is built around the idea that relationships and community building are what create real safety, not the police.
We believe 38 in Chicago, these 4 square blocks, is proof of concept of what it means to become neighbors in real reality.
Twice a day, every day, folks who represent various projects and strategies within the occupation meet to imagine a new way forward.
Right here, we believe Black Lives Matter. Right here, this is about Black, brown, and indigenous lives. This is stolen land, stolen lives. Right here, we listen to slave descendant Black women because we done tried it every other way.
Organizers have a list of 24 demands they say must be met by the city before they agree to leave. It includes things like recalling the county prosecutor, creating jobs, supporting affordable housing, and dedicating hundreds of thousands of dollars to BIPOC businesses in the square. Some demands could take years to achieve and fall outside the city's purview. But that's the thing. These protesters are in it for the long haul.
This is ours. It's ours because we named it and we claimed it and we're stepping into it and living it and practicing it. This is what community looks like. Oh, wait a minute. That is what community looks like. This is what community Tell them what community looks like. This is what community looks like. Tell them what community looks like. This is what community looks like.
Organizers aren't calling to defund the police or reform a flawed policing model. Instead, they're focused on the ways in which systemic racism is deployed against Black Americans.
If people felt that the lives in which we lived were actually just, there would have been no need in the first place to block traffic. There wouldn't have been this deep call to look at the conditions in this neighborhood that are systemic and historical, and a kind of putting a collective foot down to say no more.
Janelle Austin is lead caretaker of the George Floyd Global Memorial, and she's painstakingly worked to preserve thousands of offerings at the site.
We're going here.
She says the city isn't just trying to shut down this occupation, it's trying to co-opt the way the site of Floyd's murder is memorialized.
You can't be both the villain and the superhero of the story. You can't go around killing Black men and erecting memorials in their honor.
The city wants to remove the barricades, move the activist camp and services, and allow traffic to flow through again.
It's not their story to tell. And if they attempt to tell the story, there are certain things that they will intentionally exclude out because there's a truth in this story that doesn't bode well for the city of Minneapolis. What is that? That a city employee on city time killed a man.
When you dive deeper into the story of 38th and Chicago, you'll find a neighborhood that's been hurting for years. And what George Floyd's death prompted was the realization that it was time for the community to do something about it.
When Black lives are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up like that.
The weekend before the verdict, organizers held an event in solidarity with Black and Asian Americans.
Black and brown! Black and brown!
A caravan of folks who wanted to honor Black and brown victims of police violence showed up at the barricades to add their support.
Stop honking! Stop honking!
And Mylisha Bo-Smith, a volunteer caretaker, asked them to show reverence by quietly entering this sacred space.
All right, now tell them this is how we ride in George Floyd Square.
Mylisha quit her job taking care of elderly people to dedicate herself to the occupation.
I love you, love.
She's near universally known to folks here as Auntie.
This name is not over here. It should be.
During the course of producing this film, Daunte Wright was shot and killed by officers in a suburb of Minneapolis. But Mylisha wants folks also to remember Adam Toledo, a 13-year-old shot and killed just a few weeks earlier by Chicago police.
His death is just as important as George Floyd's. Daunte Wright's death is just as important as George Floyd's. It still amounts to the same thing. If people understand the principles of why these barriers are up, they can understand.
The legacies of racism and white privilege have left an indelible, traumatic mark on the lives of Black Americans who Mylisha says only have two choices.
What? Either be killed or fail. Two options. I don't even drive my car. My car been parked on the other side of this block since like October. I'm so scared to drive my car. I'm so scared to interact with the police in any type of way. They're gonna have to chase me here. They're gonna have to chase me here, and I'm gonna call everybody around here. Y'all, I'm coming, open the barriers, cause I'm coming.
Black residents account for only 19% of the city's population, and yet police are at least 7 times more likely to use force against them than white people. Beyond police brutality, Black people in this city face abysmal levels of racial inequality. Just a quarter of Black families in Minneapolis own a home. The roots of injustice run deep at 38th and Chicago. This is an intersection where gentrification and poverty meets a history of gun violence and gang membership, which was already an issue in the area long before the occupation. And that's created another source of tension. Police are generally not welcome inside the barricades, and this has some neighbors frustrated.
Here, bullet hole, bullet hole, bullet hole, bullet hole.
Just a block from the square, we met up with resident Monica Nilsson.
I think many of us as neighbors have not spoken out for this past year, whether we're Black or brown or white, because anything that was counter to the idea that what's happening in George Floyd Square is a good thing could be viewed as racist or classist or uninformed.
Monica's lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, and she says this past year was the worst she's witnessed with gang and gun violence.
I have driven in my alley to try to come home, and there have been people with guns at their side parked in our alley, and I would just very calmly say, "Are you moving?" or "I'm trying to get home." And the answer is no.
An AJ Plus analysis found a 1,000% increase in the number of ShotSpotter activations in this area from 2019 to 2020. But violent crime across Minneapolis is at a 5-year high, and about 200 officers quit or took extended time off after Floyd was killed. Monica's concern is that despite the noble intentions of the square's organizers, criminal activity has still grown in its surroundings.
What has happened with the autonomous zone style of shutting things down is that it has given people who are doing harm to other people a way to be sequestered and not have law enforcement or even residents actively driving by to make sure that a situation isn't brewing into a killing.
The city's police chief, Madera Arredondo, who refused an interview with AJ Plus for this story, has said this is why he's committed to opening the intersection back up.
For those group of individuals who say that 38th in Chicago is there for healing and mourning, I would challenge them that with the violence that has occurred, if any of them can look me in the eye today to say that intersection, the way it currently is operating, is contributing to the peace and safety, we've got a problem.
But other neighbors we spoke with paint a very different picture of what's happening.
Has there been a rise in crime? Yes. Is it because of George Floyd Square? No.
Andy Brown lives 500 feet from where George Floyd was killed and is part of the peaceful resistance at the square.
So right here is where the officer assaulted me.
He sued and later settled with the MPD over an incident last summer where he says an officer pushed him to the ground.
Doing well, how are you?
Andy says he actually feels safer since the occupation because of neighborly bonds formed.
I don't feel unsafe, period. Because I know my community members. I know my neighbors. The more connected you are, the more you watch out for one another. So, if I see something suspicious, while I'm not calling the cops, I'm on my phone reaching out saying, "Hey, is everything okay? Do you need anything?" And I think that's what the future, at least in our community, looks like right now, is that we're much more inter-reliant on each other and not necessarily reliant on the way policing has been done.
But community efforts haven't prevented violent crimes. 3 days before jury selection in Derek Chauvin's trial, 30-year-old youth mentor Imez Wright was shot on the same corner where Floyd died. His death raised questions about continuing to shun police from the square. But Andy says even when residents call for help, cops still avoid the area. He believes police are doing this deliberately because they feel disempowered.
So if you don't show up and crime goes up, then all of a sudden you do show up, you're the hero. And so I absolutely think that the interaction that the police have had in our neighborhood is a kind of scorched earth policy of we will starve you until you're really hungry, and then you'll realize you'll need us again, and then we'll come save the day.
Chief Arredondo has adamantly denied the square is a no-go zone.
No, there has not been a policy to direct officers to stay away.
He also said the barricades and anti-police atmosphere make responding to the area difficult.
I want to show you something. That's why I brought y'all down here.
At Say Their Name Cemetery, Janelle gives us a tour of an art installation featuring 100 cardboard grave markers to memorialize just some of the Black lives lost to police brutality across the country.
We have to do more to actually correct ourselves as a society, as opposed to simply say that the violence sprung out of nowhere, right? But oftentimes we prefer to, let's say, count bullet holes rather than to say, let me hold the hand of the person who would otherwise be holding a gun. What does it look like to walk with them, to be in community with them, and to work with them to heal the harm done? Because maybe the only way they know how to express themselves is through harming others, because that's what they experienced, right?
Janelle says that to get to the root of resolving violence, we have to look at what it means to construct and maintain a space for collective belonging.
We have to be intentional to build community and to practice living with and for people who are different from us. That's how we beat racial injustice, because we fear what we don't understand. And the more we work to understand each other, the less we fear each other. The less we fear each other, the more we can get on with changing these policies that perpetuate systemic racism.
Derek Chauvin's conviction was a relief, but just 30 minutes after the verdict, the crowd was reminded why courts alone cannot deliver racial justice.
Our girl just got shot in Columbus, Ohio.
Micaiah Bryant was just 16 years old.
See, right here. I just said this. Hopefully, by the grace of God, it doesn't happen. And literally, within seconds after I say this, she's telling me this. This is real life, man. And it don't matter where we're at, not just Minneapolis, Minnesota. It doesn't matter.
For Kia Bible, co-founder of the Occupations Medical Unit, this is exactly why their work must continue.
That's why we're not leaving. There's so many lives yet for us to have to fight for.
What the folks at George Floyd Square want the world to know is that when you treat the community as an adversary, that itself is a powerful provocation. And this community isn't going anywhere.
I stand. We stand. The gatekeeper. When you see that Javier is yellow and you hear from a mile away, you know she's standing. When you come in the middle of this square and you see that big old puff, you see that's my Lisa, you know that she's standing. When you need help because you said, oops, I done bumped my head, and Kia and the team from 612 NASH are out here. You know who's been out here. You know who stands. Y'all know Janelle Austin has been out here tirelessly making sure that everybody's offering is treated as a sacred thing. This place is many things at once. Yes, it is a memorial for a man who was killed by the city of Minneapolis. And yes, it is now a protest zone in the furtherance of justice resolution and the 24 demands. But first and foremost, it is a community. It is a community. It's our home. This is what community looks like.
Yes, ma'am.
Show them what community looks like.
This is what community looks like.